My name is Charlotte, and everything changed the day I discovered Grandma's will. I remember exactly where I was when I got the news. The phone rang in the middle of the afternoon as I was leaving work. The screen showed Madeline's name, my older sister. I sighed before answering. Our last few encounters had been tense, always involving some decision she'd made without consulting us. Charlotte, the house has been sold. I was silent for a few seconds trying to process the words. What? The beach house. We closed the sale today. The money's already in the account. A cold sensation ran through my body. Grandma's house? Sold? You couldn't do that alone. My voice came out louder than I expected. Benjamin and I also have a share in that. Madeline let out an impatient sigh. Charlotte, let's not start with the drama. You know, keeping that house was a waste. It was just sitting there, full of old memories. We needed to move on. We needed. What did she mean by we? Benjamin and I had never talked about selling the house. The last time we were there, we discussed renovations, not sales. Who signed the papers? I asked with a knot in my stomach. I took care of everything. Alone. She was silent for a moment. Charlotte, don't complicate things. The buyer has already paid. The money is with me, and I know exactly how to use it best. My heart raced. Madeline, that's illegal. You can't sell a property without the consent of all the heirs. You don't understand anything about this. Her tone was dry. Grandma's will gave me the authority to make the necessary decisions. I just did what needed to be done. But something didn't fit. My grandmother had always been careful with the house. She used to say that place was a legacy, that nobody could just get rid of it. I hung up the phone and rushed home. I grabbed the copy of the will that was stored in a box of old documents and started flipping through the pages. And that's where I found it. A hidden clause in small print made it clear. The property can only be sold with the signature and consent of all direct heirs. My hands were shaking. Madeline didn't have that right. The discovery of the lie. I stared at those words for minutes, trying to find an explanation. My heart was pounding, and a wave of anger mixed with frustration washed over me. How did she manage to sell without my signature? Without Benjamin's signature? I picked up the phone and dialed my brother. Ben, we need to talk. Now. He arrived at my apartment less than an hour later. Benjamin had always been the most balanced among us. He was the peacemaker, the one who tried to keep the family together, even when Madeline and I argued. When I explained the situation, he frowned. That doesn't make sense. I never signed anything. Did you sign something? Of course not. The silence between us was heavy. He took the will from my hand and reread the clause. Then how did she manage to sell it? There was an obvious answer, but I didn't want to say it out loud. She forged our signatures. Benjamin looked at me as if I had just said something absurd. Charlotte, no. Madeline may be selfish, but forging documents? That's a crime. And do you have another explanation? He didn't answer. A knot formed in my stomach. This was worse than I imagined. We have to see the sale papers, I said firmly. We need proof. What if we're wrong? Benjamin hesitated. What if there really was a legal loophole? I knew he wanted to believe that. He wanted to believe that our sister wasn't capable of doing something so serious. But I had no doubts. I grabbed my car keys. Then let's go ask her. The confrontation. I drove to Madeline's apartment with Benjamin beside me. He was tense, and I could sense that part of him was still hoping it was all a misunderstanding. Madeline opened the door and looked at us without surprise. I don't have patience for more arguments. Great. Then just answer one question. I walked in without waiting for an invitation, placing the will on the table. How did you manage to sell the house without our signatures? Her eyes flickered away for a moment. That's already settled. The money is in my account. That doesn't answer my question. Benjamin crossed his arms. Did you forge our names, Madeline? She was silent for a moment, and then she laughed. A short, dry laugh. Are you really going to make this scene? Over an old house. Over a crime, I replied coldly. She grabbed a glass of water and took a sip before speaking again. I did what was best for everyone. Nobody would argue if I just resolved everything. The money is safe now. We can divide it fairly. Benjamin exhaled heavily. Are you listening to what you're saying? You committed fraud. You're not going to report me, she said calmly. I'm your sister. Think of the family. Think of what this could do to us. I felt my breathing quicken. Did you think of that when you forged our signatures? This time Madeline didn't answer. Her silence was the confession I needed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. But above all, I wanted justice. Madeline may have thought we were weak, but she was wrong. I looked at Benjamin. Let's go to Scarlett. Now. And at that moment I knew that our family would never be the same. Madeline's silence was all I needed to confirm. She had betrayed us. The anger burned inside me like a fire out of control. Benjamin, beside me, still seemed stunned, as if his brain refused to process the truth. Madeline watched us with an unnerving calm, as if she had already planned all our reactions. Are you really going to take this forward? Her voice was cold, challenging. What do you intend to do? Report me? Drag me into a court as if I were a common criminal? Her calmness only increased my hatred. You are a criminal, Madeline. My voice came out firm, but my chest was on fire. Document forgery is not a simple lapse in judgment. You lied, deceived your own family, and you're still here trying to justify it. She sighed and rubbed her temples, as if she were exhausted from dealing with me. Charlotte, you've always been dramatic. Benjamin finally reacted. He slammed his hand on the coffee table, making her glass of water shake. This isn't drama, Madeline. This is serious. And what do you want me to do now? Return the money and pretend nothing happened. She leaned back on the sofa, crossing her arms. I laughed. A bitter, humorless laugh. Do you think you have a choice? The sale is illegal. The judge can annul the transaction, and you'll have to return everything anyway. Madeline narrowed her eyes. For the first time, her confidence wavered. It's not that simple. The buyer isn't going to accept that peacefully. The money has already been transferred. There are contracts involved. Benjamin ran his hands through his hair, frustrated. You've gotten yourself into a much bigger mess than you imagined, Maddie. I solved a problem. She insisted. No, you created one. And now we're all stuck in it because of you. The silence that followed was dense, suffocating. Then I took a deep breath and stood up. We're going to resolve this the right way. Madeline frowned. What does that mean? I looked directly into her eyes. It means we're going to talk to Scarlett. And then to a judge. The first step towards justice. I left Madeline's apartment feeling the weight of the decision we had just made. Benjamin followed me, still a bit hesitant. In the car he finally spoke. Are you sure this is the only way? What do you suggest? That we stand by while Madeline gets away with it. He sighed. No. But this will destroy our family, Charlotte. I looked at him with a tired expression. She already did that. We're just trying to pick up the pieces. Benjamin remained silent for the rest of the way to Scarlett's office. Scarlett's help. Scarlett was our cousin and a lawyer specializing in real estate and inheritance law. When I called her, her reaction was immediate. Come here right now. This is serious. When we arrived, she greeted us with a serious expression. She took the will and carefully read the clause that prohibited the sale without the consent of all heirs. When she finished, she looked at us. If she sold without your signatures, there are two possibilities. Either she obtained judicial authorization, which I highly doubt, or she forged the documents. It was the second one, I replied without hesitation. Scarlett scoffed, incredulous. Madeline didn't do that, did she? Benjamin ran his hands over his face. She didn't deny it. And the sale was too fast. This wouldn't have happened without some manipulation. Scarlett took a deep breath and grabbed a notepad. First step. Let's check the sale records. I need the signed documents. If there was forgery, that can be proven. Second, we need to talk to the buyer's lawyer. If he's not aware of the clause, we might have an ally in this. I nodded, determined. And if we discover the forgery? Scarlett looked at me seriously. Then Madeline can be prosecuted criminally. Benjamin shifted in his chair, uncomfortable. Do we have to do that? Ben, she stole from us. My voice came out harsh. If she's not held accountable, what's to stop her from doing this again? He closed his eyes for a moment. Let's try to resolve this without destroying everything. Scarlett sighed. I'll do my best. But the truth is, depending on what we find, this could end very badly for Madeline. I looked at Benjamin. Maybe that's exactly what she needs to understand what she did. The beginning of the downfall. Scarlett made a few calls and managed to get access to the sale documents. When she received them, she confirmed what we already suspected. Benjamin's and my signatures were there. But they weren't ours. This is identity theft, Scarlett said, looking at the papers with a mix of disbelief and disgust. If this is pursued, Madeline could be arrested. I felt a weight in my chest. She deserves it. Benjamin stood up from his chair and began pacing back and forth. We need to talk to her. Give her a chance to confess before this goes to the authorities. She already had the chance to confess, Ben. She laughed in our faces. He clenched his fists. She's our sister. And she betrayed us. Silence filled the room. Scarlett cleared her throat. I can file the petition to annul the sale now. If you want to report her, now is the time. I exchanged glances with Benjamin. And then, without hesitating, I nodded. Do it. It was after 9 at night when Benjamin and I parked in front of Madeline's apartment. The air was heavy, charged with a tension I had never felt before. Benjamin was restless. He fidgeted with his fingers, tapped his foot on the car floor. Are you sure we want to do this? He asked, more to himself than to me. I turned my face and stared at my brother. She's already made her choice, Ben. Now she needs to deal with the consequences. He let out a long sigh and nodded. We went up to her apartment and knocked on the door. When Madeline opened it, her expression changed from irritation to caution when she saw us there. If you've come to give me another lecture, you can leave. I pushed the door without asking permission and entered. Benjamin hesitated before following me. It's over, Madeline, I said bluntly. We know about the forgery. We have the documents, and Scarlett has already filed the process to annul the sale. Her face turned pale. For the first time I saw fear in her eyes. You wouldn't do that. Benjamin crossed his arms. Do you really think you can keep manipulating the situation? She looked from one to the other, as if looking for a way out. You don't understand. I didn't do this to hurt anyone. I laughed, a dry and incredulous laugh. No? Then why didn't you talk to us before? Why did you forge our signatures? You knew we were against the sale, so you decided to simply erase us from the equation. She pressed her lips together but didn't answer. It's simple, Madeline, I continued. Either you confess now and try to make a deal before this gets worse, or you'll be taken to court and see your name dragged through the mud. She stood still. Then, after a long silence, her expression changed. The fear was replaced by something cold, calculating. You think you've won, but you haven't. Her voice came out low, almost a whisper. What does that mean? Benjamin asked, his voice cautious. She crossed her arms and smiled, as if she knew something we didn't. I've already spent part of the money. My blood ran cold. What? I invested a sum. Paid off some debts. The money isn't all there. I looked at Benjamin, who seemed as stunned as I was. Then you really have no way out. My voice was as cold as ice. She forged our signatures, sold the house illegally, and still spent the money. If there was a chance for redemption, she had just thrown it away herself. See you in court, I said, before turning and leaving. The impact of the discovery. In the following days, the news of the fraud began to spread. The buyer's lawyer was furious when he learned that the sale was illegal, and threatened to sue Madeline for financial damages. Scarlett was focused on annulling the sale, but the case was starting to take on even greater proportions. Benjamin was becoming increasingly distressed. This is getting out of control, Charlotte, he said one night, when we met to discuss the progress of the process. Madeline could actually go to jail. And whose fault is that? I retorted impatiently. She had chances to resolve this. She preferred to defy us. He ran his hands over his face. Still, she's our sister. I sighed. I know, but I wasn't the one who put her in this position. She did it herself. The case was advancing. Scarlett managed to schedule a hearing to try to annul the sale. But there was another problem. Madeline refused to admit the forgery. If she didn't confess, the process could drag on for months. The only solution was to prove the crime irrefutably. And for that, we needed Henry, Grandma's former lawyer. Henry's testimony. Henry was a retired lawyer, but he still had a sharp memory. When we went to his house and showed him the sale documents, he analyzed the signatures carefully. These are not your original signatures. Can you prove that? Scarlett asked. He took out an old binder and opened it to a specific page. Here are the original documents that you signed years ago, when you accepted your grandmother's will. The signatures are completely different. Scarlett took the papers and compared them side by side. This is more than enough to prove forgery. My heart raced. Now we had a powerful weapon. But I knew that once it was used, there would be no turning back for Madeline. The turnaround in court. On the day of the hearing, Madeline was visibly shaken. Her lawyer seemed nervous, probably because he knew the evidence against her was overwhelming. The judge analyzed the documents and then looked at Madeline. Mrs. Madison, do you confirm that these are your brother's signatures? She hesitated. I held my breath. Then after a long silence, she did something I didn't expect. Yes, I forged them. The murmur in the courtroom was immediate. Scarlett looked at me in surprise, and Benjamin let out a heavy sigh. So, you admit you committed real estate fraud? The judge continued. Madeline lowered her head. Yes. The silence was absolute. Scarlett stood up. Your Honor, given the confession, we ask for the immediate annulment of the sale and the restitution of the assets to the legal heirs. The judge nodded. Request accepted. The sale is annulled. But the defendant will still have to answer criminally for forgery. Madeline closed her eyes. For the first time, she seemed to really understand what she had done. Benjamin grabbed my arm. What now? I took a deep breath. Now, she's going to have to face the consequences. The house was back with us. But the victory had a bitter taste. Madeline finally admitted what she did, but the damage was done. And now we needed to decide. Seek full justice? Or give her a chance for redemption? The sentence approaches. The following days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and documents. Madeline's confession in court annulled the sale of the house, but that didn't mean everything was resolved. She still had to answer criminally. Benjamin was increasingly restless. Scarlett said that if we go to the judge, we can ask to reduce the sentence. I looked at him incredulous. You want me to ask for her? After everything she's done. He sighed, massaging his temples. Charlotte, I'm not saying we should forget. I'm just saying that maybe there's a way to end this without destroying everything. I crossed my arms. We didn't destroy anything. Madeline did. He took a deep breath and looked at me with tired eyes. What if it was the other way around? What if it was you in her place? The question hit me like a punch. Benjamin continued. She made a mistake. A big one. But she confessed. It doesn't justify it, but it means something. I remained silent. Part of me wanted to see her pay for everything. But another part still remembered the sister who was once my best friend. The last meeting before sentencing. 2 days before the final hearing, I received an unexpected message. Envelope with arrow Madeline. Can we meet? Please. I stared at the screen for a while before replying. Envelope with arrow Charlotte. Where? Envelope with arrow Madeline. At Grandma's house. Grandma's house. I took a deep breath. That house, which was almost lost forever, was now the setting for our final reckoning. When I arrived, Madeline was already there, sitting on the porch. She looked different. Thinner, eyes sunken, expression exhausted. You came, she murmured. Say what you need to say. She gripped the edge of the table tightly, as if preparing for something difficult. I know I messed everything up. Her voice faltered. I have no excuses. I just wanted to fix things. I wanted to be independent. I wanted to prove that I could do something on my own. I laughed without humor. And for that, you destroyed your own family? She closed her eyes. I was wrong. I thought I could manage before you noticed. But when I saw it, I was already in too deep. And now? Are you going to ask us to forget? She looked at me with a glimmer of despair in her eyes. No. I need you to know that I'm very sorry. It was the first time she had said it, but it was too late for words. Tomorrow in court we'll see if it matters. And then without looking back I left. The final judgment. The courtroom was packed. Journalists were at the door, interested in the twist of a real estate fraud case between siblings. Madeline was next to her lawyer, pale and tense. The judge entered the room and silence filled the space. "We are here to deliberate on the criminal liability of the defendant, Madeline Madison, in the illegal sale of property and the forgery of legal documents." Scarlett stood up and presented our arguments. "Your Honor, the defendant not only sold a property without consent, but committed a serious crime by forging signatures. However, taking into account her confession and cooperation, the direct heirs agree that the sentence should consider alternatives to imprisonment." The judge raised an eyebrow. "The heirs are asking for a reduced sentence?" Scarlett looked at me. I took a deep breath before standing up. "Yes." My voice was firm but my head was spinning. Was I really doing this? The judge observed Madeline for a long moment. "Madeline Madison, you forged documents, deceived your family, and sold a property illegally. This cannot go unpunished." Madeline lowered her head. "However," the judge continued, "taking into account the confession and the petition from the heirs, the court determines an alternative sentence of community service, full restitution of the sale amount, and a ban on carrying out any real estate transactions in the next 5 years." The gavel banged. Case closed. Relief ran through my body, but it wasn't a happy relief. Madeline wasn't going to prison, but the weight of justice was still upon her. She looked at me, trying to understand if I hated her, or if there was still something to salvage. And to be honest, I didn't know either. Madeline had lost her credibility, her financial freedom, and perhaps her family. The question that remained was there a chance for redemption? The feeling of emptiness was the first thing that hit me when everything was over. The house was back with us. The money would be returned, and Madeline would be unable to conduct any real estate transactions for years. But even so, I didn't feel like we had one. Benjamin and I barely spoke in the following days. Scarlett followed through with the legal processes and ensured that everything was resolved formally. And Madeline, she disappeared. Not from the map but from our lives. No calls. No messages. No apologies beyond the one before the sentencing. It was as if she had accepted that she was no longer part of the family. And as much as I wanted to believe I didn't care, I did. The house that survived. A month later, I finally had the courage to return to Grandma's house. I walked in slowly, smelling the familiar scent of old wood mixed with sea air. I walked through the rooms, letting my fingers slide across the walls. In the kitchen, the height marks of Benjamin and me were still on the pantry door. The table where Grandma used to serve tea and tell stories was still in the same place. Nothing there had changed. But we had changed. I sat on the sofa, feeling a weight in my chest. That's when I heard the door creak behind me. "I didn't know if you'd be here." I turned and saw Madeline standing at the entrance, hesitant. She looked tired, thinner, with deep dark circles under her eyes. For the first time, there was no arrogance in her posture. Just shame. "How did you know I was here?" I asked. She shrugged. "You always come here when you need to think." I was silent. The simple fact that she remembered that brought a strange tightness to my chest. She took a deep breath before continuing. "I didn't want to come. But Benjamin insisted. He said that I should at least try." "Try what, Madeline?" My voice came out more bitter than I intended. She lowered her head. "Try to ask you for forgiveness." I closed my eyes for a moment. "That doesn't erase what you did." "I know." She approached slowly and sat in the armchair opposite me. "I lost everything." Her voice trembled. "My reputation, my credibility. And worst of all, I lost you." I swallowed hard. "You lost us when you chose to betray us." She nodded, as if she expected that answer. "Do you think you can ever forgive me?" The question hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. Forgiveness or ruin? I looked at my sister. The woman who had spent the last few years treating me as an obstacle. The woman who sold our house without permission, forged our signatures, and tried to manipulate us. But I also saw the girl who held my hand when I was afraid of the dark. The teenager who taught me to ride a bike. The sister who was once my best friend before becoming my enemy. I let out a long sigh. "I don't know if I can forgive you now, Madeline." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I understand." We were silent for a while. The sound of the waves in the background was the only thing filling the space between us. Then finally I spoke. But I think that one day maybe I can try. And for the first time since it all began, I saw Madeline cry for real. The end of a cycle. In the following months, things didn't go back to normal. Madeline completed her community service, returned the money, and disappeared from the business world. She never tried to escape the consequences, and that was the first step in proving that she was changing. Benjamin continued to be the bridge between us. Little by little, we started talking. Forgiveness didn't come easy, but it came. A year later, we returned to Grandma's house to spend Christmas together. It was strange at first, but looking around and seeing my family reunited again, I realized that what Madeline did hadn't destroyed us forever. It hurt us, yes, but it didn't break us. And in the end, that was the greatest justice of all. The family was almost destroyed. Madeline paid for what she did. But more than that, she learned that trust is not regained with words but with time. And me? I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to move forward. And I was finally ready for that.
Hi, you are on the Moving Narratives channel. Subscribe and follow